Fellas, today we are talking about the Ikelos SMG. Yes, it is back. Matter of fact, to even get this SMG, you need to go pick up the weekly bounties from either Sloan, and I think Asher also has it. Complete these weekly bounties though, you get a chance of getting this Ikelos SMG amongst the Ikelos Sniper and a couple other items in the loot pool. Today though, guys, we're going to be reviewing this SMG as it's extremely unique for many reasons. Number one, it's an aggressive frame SMG. High damage, high recoil, that's right, 750 rounds per minute. And number two, it has a very unique trait that's only found on these Ikelos weapons, and that is of course Serif Rounds, which does have some benefits despite it not reflecting it in its stats. Now before we get into today's review, we have a sponsorship. Fellas, it's that time of the month, that's right. Raid Shadow Legends is back again. Turn-based RPG game with epic battles, epic champs, and this month, there's actually a new feature going on right now called Tag Team Arena. This is actually a new competitive PvP battle mode, and instead of your normal 4 versus 4 battle like in Classic Arena, this is actually a series of 3 4 versus 4 battles. It's the best of 3. Whoever wins 2 battle wins the series. So essentially arena mode on hard. Now, throughout this event, considering that this mode is new, the developers are actually giving out special rewards to those that rank up and finish high in the leaderboards. And considering we love to cover PvP in just about every single game, this is actually an interesting take, okay? I'm just saying. I can't name many turn-based strategy games that also have multiplayer PvP. It's wild. Now, for my new players that might be interested in Raid, down below is a link to Raid Shadow Legends. New players get 100,000 silver, plus 2 clan boss keys, 3 ancient shards, and the free champion adjudicator. Also, if you happen to be looking for a clan, Bayou Boys is still going strong. So feel free to come by, guys. Again, for my new players, your rewards will be placed at this treasure chest here. Now back to the review. You know, 750 round per minute SMGs, or just SMGs in general, are just not used much. You've got a weapon that essentially has a worse time to kill, or comparable time to kill to an auto rifle, but significantly less range. 750s though are like that sweet spot, right? They've got a solid time to kill that kind of rivals that of like lightweights, things like Recluse, Pillager, Callus Mini Tool, but simultaneously though has the range that matches that of precision-based SMGs. Today, guys, we have a number of roles in front of us. Big shout out to All Might and Flying Squid for allowing me to get on their accounts and test these roles out. So first up, let's just dive into these roles, guys. The first role we have here is definitely more gauged at PvP. It would appear to be the God role. We've got Small Bore as our barrel perk, which is not bad. Again, this is nice because it boosts not just stability, but also our range. Next to it, we have Accurate Rounds for that bump there in range. Dynamic Sway Reduction for our first trait here, which is fantastic on an SMG. You want something that's going to help you maintain accuracy throughout the gunfight? Dynamic Sway is it. On top of that, you get a stability bump as well. And if there's one thing that's kind of hurting these 750 round per minute SMGs, it's the lack of stability. Stability is actually pretty poor. Now, it's not as poor as other SMGs. Hard Truce, which is the Crucible aggressive SMG, has like 15 stability. Cold Front, which is another aggressive SMG, 16 stability. The beautiful thing about Ikelos, it sits at a nice crispy 39. And if you're boosting it with things like Small Bore, maybe even a Masterwork, those things combined with something like Dynamic Sway is plenty enough to keep this weapon manageable, even for my controller users. And we were bouncing back and forth here for both controller and mouse and keyboard, because that was like a big complaint that I had with Ikelos back in year 1. I felt like the SMG, in comparison to other SMGs, just wasn't manageable enough. Dynamic really reins this gun in, guys. Now, the final traits in the column, we have Tap the Trigger, grants a short period of increased stability and accuracy on the initial trigger pull. I can't tell you how overpowered this perk actually is. It's good on so many weapons, but on an SMG, it was the trait that made me choose Stochastic Variable over other SMGs back in year 1. This one trait is going to help you on the front end. Stacked with something like Dynamic Sway, my God. Now, this is actually a really good role. It's got Vorpal as well if I wanted to swap to that inside of PvE, which, by the way, does increase our damage against yellow bars. You definitely don't want to overlook Vorpal, guys, as it's just a nice flat buff against your higher health targets. Now, this seemed to be a good role. It actually starts to experience damage fall off at about 17 meters. Considering all the perks that we have here buffing not just the stability, but also the range, this seemed to be a good middle ground role. But is it the God role? The next role I'm going to show you is not the God role, but it is a role that has a specific perk on it that is extremely interesting, and that is Serif Rounds. Serif Rounds states that rounds over-penetrate targets, also bounces off hard surfaces. Now, the association that's been made about Serif Rounds is like high caliber and ricochet rounds had a baby. People have stated that Serif Rounds offer some level of increased flinch, although to me in general, I think Ikelos already has a good base default flinch to begin with. Whatever selling point it may have in the flinch department, that's not what makes Serif Rounds so deadly. Notice right here when we're actually testing damage fall off, this Ikelos SMG sits about 17 meters as well. But when we swap to Serif Rounds, our range goes up to 19 meters. Close to 20 meters, actually. It's about 19 and a half. Serif Rounds has some weird, funky ability in which it actually boosts our range without actually boosting the stats, which makes us believe that Serif Rounds might be one of the only perks in the game that boosts our zoom. It actually increases the zoom. Now, this is not being reflected online, or at least to my knowledge. When I go look right now at LightGG, there is no stat reflection of Serif Rounds. There's no stability bump, no range bump, but it does give us a 2-meter increase there in range. And it's obviously helping, which is more significant than say something like accurized rounds. I showed you the roll we had a second ago with pretty decent range, and that was still capping out at 17 or about 17.5. The point I'm trying to make is that Serif Rounds, even though a lot of people are saying it's a pointless perk, it's not exactly pointless, as its benefits are just hidden, which takes us to the God roll portion of this video. And first up, I want to mention this Ikelos SMG. Before we get into this God roll, felt fantastic. One of the best feeling SMGs in the game. I think it messes with opponents so much, it's like they don't know how to combat it. I was genuinely impressed with this SMG, especially in its stats category. The fact that it has range, 50 and plus, before we even start talking about barrel perks, pretty much rivaling that of precision-based SMGs, but simultaneously has stability that far surpasses other aggressive SMGs. But the only SMG that I would say that Ikelos really matches itself up to in terms of lethality is probably Huckleberry and Huckleberry's Bay. Now, in terms of the God roll for what you should be going for inside of PvP, guys, hands down, tap the trigger, dynamic sway, such a good trait combination. 100%. If you're looking to use Ikelos inside of Crucible, those two trait combinations together is definitely the way you want to go. But instead of us going accurized rounds or even steady rounds, I want us to go with Serif Rounds. Serif Rounds is going to tack on about an extra 1.5 meters to 2 meters. This is extremely nice, guys. This far surpasses that of accurized rounds and actually allows you to load out in other areas. Maybe you want to go with the stability masterwork. Go right ahead. Serif Rounds, with whatever zoom capabilities that it offers, kind of frees up not just your masterwork, but also your barrel perk. Maybe you want to go with a barrel perk like small bore or even polygonal, something that actually helps the stability there to maintain that consistency in your shot, even though dynamic's going to do that as well as tap the trigger. All I'm trying to say is that Serif Rounds frees up the necessity to overload this SMG into range, which to me is a huge win. This is not a pointless perk, guys. Serif Rounds is excellent. And we're not even talking about the ricochet capabilities or the fact that it over-penetrates target and its flinch capabilities. We're just purely talking about the fact that it extends the range of the weapon, which is already a win. So that to me, guys, is the PvP God roll. That's it. That's what you should go for. But let's talk about PvE. You probably noticed that this weapon comes with Disruption Break, which hands down you shouldn't overlook. Disruption Break on an SMG, especially with something like anti-barrier rounds, which is present this season, allows this weapon to do more damage with your kinetics when popping those champions' anti-barrier shields. This is actually a fantastic perk just for that specifically. Maybe if you want to rocket Disruption Break and Grave Robber, run and gun, get a melee build together, constantly be punching to reload your weapon. We did give Subsistence a go though, Subsistence with Disruption. I had some issues with it. Not that it's not good, but Subsistence, you really want to feed it with a damage dealing perk, which we do have two of. We have Surrounded, which combined with Surrounded Spec gives a nice big bump there of like what, 35% there in damage flat. All you have to do is be surrounded, which is kind of tough. Okay, let me just be real here. I love Surrounded with Surrounded Spec, but damn it, does it not need a bigger radius? To me, I think it's too fickle. And a lot of times, by the time I get in there, get Surrounded proc, I die. I would say Surrounded with Grave Robber, Subsistence, or Threat Detector is still a great PvE loadout. And depending on how much damage you're taking, you might want to consider Pulse Monitor and Surrounded. You know, Pulse Monitor got a buff this past season. I think it really will provide more on an SMG than any other weapon type. Any weapon that kind of like puts you in harm's way, like an SMG or maybe even a shotgun, pulse monitor really starts to shine. Outside of that though, guys, if you're looking for something that's a little steadier and provides more of a flat buff to deal more damage against your higher health targets, Vorpal's still a great option. No, it's not as big of a buff as Surrounded with Surrounded Spec, but you will sit at approximately a 15% buff against those higher health targets, combined with say something like a Major Spec to even stack with that even more. The other build is Demolitionists, which if you're running any grenade-based build, having a Demolitionist roll weapon, especially on something like an SMG, is always a great route to go with. I think the only other question, and the one thing we did not test, is Serif Rounds against champions. It states that the rounds over-penetrate targets. You've probably noticed that armor-piercing rounds pretty much says the same thing. Rounds cause extra damage to combatant shields and over-penetrates them. Most notably, armor-piercing rounds can do things like shoot through hive shields. They also do more damage through anti-barrier shields. I have not tested Serif Rounds to see if they do more damage. It's not a big buff. I think it's like, what, 5% more? Still nice. I mean, any bit of buff and damage is always welcome. One thing I did check though, if Serif Rounds can go through hive shields, they do not. At least from my testing, they're not able to actually go through the shields and do damage, which makes me think that Serif Rounds doesn't actually do more damage to anti-barrier shields. Could be wrong. Again, like I said, haven't tested it. For my more dedicated PvE players, feel free to let us know if Ikelos is doing more damage against anti-barrier champions when gunning down their barriers. So guys, that is your Ikelos SMG. Hands down, one of the best feeling SMGs. You get the right roll with this thing, tap the trigger, dynamic sway, Serif Rounds on top of that to boost that range. You are going to be wrecking with this thing. The weapon has fantastic stats. It also has a 90 recoil direction, which isn't perfectly vertical, but very close. And if you wanted to, you could throw on a counterbalance mod, which would make the weapon even more vertical for you if you so choose. I felt like I didn't need it. I was rocking Icarus with mine, taking to the air bunch, trying to get airborne on my enemies, especially shotgun rushers, and you'll be amazed how fast this SMG melts. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.